I value freedom. In my mind, it's an expansive concept which provides the underpinning for ideas, ways of living, and a horizonless, broad-based thinking. It's a core value in my life, my kink, and my relationships. My want for freedom coincided beautifully with the sexual revolution of the 70s. I knew a lot of kinky people then. I was lucky. They had a taste for the unusual and the ability and means to create it. I loved my thigh-high boots. They were like a second skin for me, and they felt powerful. There were clubs with back rooms that encouraged raw sexuality. And blessed as I was, I grew up in Miami, and I had Fort Lauderdale in my backyard. This means I had access to a city that was popping and moving and on the edge. The revolution was everywhere. I thought I was revolutionary. I was sure of it. I was certain everything in the world was going to change. I loved disco. I experienced my first stiletto heels and never went back. And I thought my silver lame size 4 pants were amazing. The pictures have since been destroyed. I was learning about my appetites, and they were met with nonchalant acceptance. Those desires were also fueled by opportunity. There were those back rooms, and in some cases, front rooms in the late hours, and there were plenty of private parties. My entry into the life was different from what I hear from others. I never thought I was alone. I didn't think there was anything wrong with what I wanted to do. It felt so good. How could there possibly be anything wrong with what felt so good? For a while, I thought almost everyone was kinky. I just thought my uncool parents weren't, because, of course, my parents were uncool. My life was filled with firsts. Each first was like coming home and finding a treasure trove packed full of everything bright, wonderful, and shiny. Each new experience was like the beginning of some golden age. I thought what we were doing was brand new. I thought what we were doing would define how life would always be from that moment forward. The sexual revolution really was all around me. Monogamy during that time was a dirty word. That type of attachment seemed the antithesis to freedom. People having sex in all sorts of gender configurations seemed absolutely normal. Philosophically, I believed that almost everyone was bisexual. I thought bisexuality was a matter of enlightenment. Biology hadn't yet occurred to me. Hedonism was the call of the day. Truly being in your body and mixing sex with SM was commonplace. Sex was always mixed with S&M. There weren't lines of separation as we see today. S&M was considered to be a form of sex, and the point of it was mind-body pleasure. So when you consented to S&M, you were consenting to sex. When the story of O was made into a movie, I thought that was really annoying. The movie's portrayal was not reflective of what I was seeing. It didn't have anything to do with what was happening around me. Granted, it had a few elements that I recognized, yes. But other than those few elements, it was pure fantasy. There was another revolution going on during that period of time also, That movie was decidedly not helpful in convincing the second wave of feminists that S&M really was hot and sexy. My feminist friends were certain S&M was patriarchal violence against women and another way to keep women down. They were convinced that S&M was counter-revolutionary. I was convinced that feminism was about gaining the right to choose, and choose whatever one might, with freedom regardless of gender, and I saw no apparent conflict between them. Regardless of that annoying movie, or those philosophical disagreements, I thought the possibilities were limitless, and everything would only continue to be more and more progressive. I was also sure I was going to remain a size 4. I also knew I was bisexual. I thought the sexual revolution would blow away the regimented sexual notions of the past for men, women, and my friends who had not yet discovered the word androgynous that went hand in hand with the 80s. I also discovered during those 80s, well, no, maybe I wasn't bisexual after all. And then again, during that golden period, I also thought that women would gain equality in their paychecks eminently being 1 or 2 years. Not everything works out how we think it's going to. But I did learn a lot about sexual freedom. I learned a tremendous amount about freely expressing my desire and was encouraged to do so without negative repercussions. While I understood S&M, I had no idea how undereducated I was. Fortunately, an education did come quickly enough, and I did get on a learning track that would support my illicit endeavors and twisted desires the rest of my days. I knew I was running in 2 very different worlds: the party track and something else that I couldn't name. I knew for a fact when I hatched that it would take a few years to be accepted, a few more years to be respected with cause. And initially, I was viewed as a party girl not to be taken too seriously by most. I learned I liked that party track. It was good for sex and it was damn good for play. And then there was another group who was forging lasting alliances between them, and much harder to understand. I could smell the power, but I couldn't name it. I knew I wanted their respect. I was sure I could get it, and so I did, but only after I opened my mind. The body learns so easily, but sometimes the heart and mind must be cultivated and simmered slowly. Those ideas of this endless well of freedom were challenged by the 80s, when playgrounds and the many different bars with back rooms closed or changed their policies about what could happen on their premises. I saw my freedoms being whittled away, piece by piece, just like I saw men I loved dying swiftly and terribly. After all, I was in Miami, where Anita Bryant had successfully shut down gay rights, and the playground suddenly was of legal interest due to the ignorance of AIDS. Everything changed. It felt like we were going backwards. A seriousness came into being, and it felt like the party was over. I think for a time, grief and shock defined our activities. It's not to say there wasn't joy, but it became complicated. It changed the parties and what could happen there. And here is where we see the divide between S&M and sex. You can't imagine unless you were there. Part of it be in that place where suddenly you are participating in fully liberated, out in the open sex, no longer adhering to a pious world, to suddenly be in a position where sex is the killer. And to make matters worse, you don't have accurate information on prevention, much less a cure. The party was definitely over, but little did I know that the next level of freedom was around the corner. In the 80s, so many groups all over the country began to form. And they changed the landscape of everything we ever knew to be possible. During that decade, we saw Black Rose in DC, GMSMA, LSM in New York, the National Leather Association, Apex, and many, many more organizations. Suddenly, there are hundreds of groups all over the country. And in that same decade, we began to have events in hotels and motels. I tell you, the late 80s and early 90s were a serious gateway drug. We had just begun having these conferences. You can't imagine the fear and excitement of that. The first events at hotels I attended, I was sure we were going to be arrested at any moment. I had no idea why I was sitting there. And I knew exactly who to blame why I was sitting there. I was sure something terrible would happen. I couldn't believe I was seeing flogging while the sun was up in the light of day in the middle of a hotel. It felt like a serious gain in foothold. And it felt like it was going to change the world, and it did. Events began to pop up all over the place, and suddenly we began to see gatherings of hundreds of people, and in a few cases we were nearing 1,000. In those early 90s, CompuServe, and in 1992, AOL chat rooms became the rage. Oh my God, what a shock. You can talk to a live person in a box and they respond right then? Oh my God, the immediacy was stunning. And yes, given our standards today, it's laughable. It is almost unimaginable. But that little box, you know, we liked the box. We didn't know about the box. Many of those rooms became pornographic, and seriously pornographic. Some of our best writers, and I'm not going to out them, really started in those rooms. Most of those people in those rooms that I was talking to, I had known them online for years. The couple people that I saw that I didn't know who they were, I thought they were friends of my friends. I had no idea. I didn't realize the significance of the internet, and I had no idea of the enormity of it. What happened next actually stayed with me a long time and was a defining moment. I watched people be dismissed because they found us through the internet. I watched the ranks close. I heard conversations about how we were being invaded by strangers who didn't know anything. I heard how they would be the end of us. They would out us. They would get into our clubs and events and shut everything down because they didn't know enough. Instead of teaching them, many people turned their back. Do I understand it? Yes, I do. I realize the people who were turning their backs were generations of people who had learned another way. I realize those were the same people who remembered that a man walked into the Ramrod in New York and opened fire with an Uzi. Those people remember the many things that were terrible and unimaginable that happened to kinky people, especially when we were seen as part of the problem of why people would die. With that, People were concerned about their identity. They were concerned about their jobs, their personal safety, their families, their livelihoods. And coming from a place where you understand you can be put in a mental institution or jailed for your proclivities, or physically harmed, or, of course they shut the door. However, by 1995, there were so many new people, and they had been exposed to S&M online, and they began to search out local groups to live their fantasies. Not only did we begin to learn how we do S&M differently, but even our language changed. We went from, we used to be called S&M and B&D, and suddenly we are now BDSM, brand new term. And those people who discovered kink online, they wanted what they saw. And those new folks wanted to stay and were going to stay in mass. By 1998, I had enough time to understand what was going on around me. There were so many new people, and after the 80s, not enough mentors. Make no mistake, it was fabulous that the dating pool expanded. That's nice. But the rest of what I saw was unconscionable. Those of you who know me know. No, I hate to see a good bottom slave, submissive, whatever word we're going to use, go to waste. And what I saw were wonderful boys, girls, and the newly invented noun called submissives, and new slaves being laid to waste. And it wasn't just the bottoms. New tops, dominants, and masters were experiencing situations that they had created harm in another person. That was never their intention. It was their own personal nightmare, and they didn't understand why it was happening. I saw inexperience decimating the next generations. I saw people who didn't understand beyond their own initial desires and imaginings. Fantasy may tell us what we want to do, but rarely does it provide the information on how to execute those desires safely. These people were not adequately prepared to consent with knowledge, much less be who they really wanted to be in full personal power. That horrified me. And by 1998, I began to pull together weekend trainings inside my house in New York. I had to do something. It was just insane. I did not want our newly found resources to be wasted. I did not want to see the harm I was seeing. It was not true to who I knew our communities to be or what we are committed to. Truth be told, one of the reasons why I focused on bottoms and created Servants Retreat, and I have since changed my mind. At the time, I thought the egos of the tops might prevent them from taking information, and that it could be perhaps difficult, and that, well, if I educate the bottoms and the slaves and give them the tools for solid personal foundation, and they have a clear understanding of the multitude of possibilities, they, as an undeniable force in the world, will teach the tops. And, well, given that I had learned so much from senior slaves, why wouldn't that work now? I was sure the only way out of a pattern of harm was to have educated and responsible adults who were able to make solid, informed decisions. I knew they needed to learn how to exercise their freedom. I knew without a shadow of a doubt that without educated consent, there could be no health in DS or MS relationships. I don't believe that Servants Retreat changed the world, but I do know thousands of people who told me it changed their world. All told, it was because I was alarmed over something that I saw. I didn't imagine I could change the world. Why? That was the last thought. I just thought I could handle some small corner of it. What you do matters. What you do in one small corner, you have no idea what it can do with the rest of the world. What you do is important. And one of those important changes through the 2000s, there were so many kinky people all over the place suddenly connecting with one another that out of sheer volume, special interest and niche groups formed. Previously, when you only knew 100 people who were doing anything like what you were doing, you tended to only have one group as an option. And this was especially true if you weren't in an urban area. Our kink language reflected those changes. Prior to 1994, you heard the word top and it covered everybody. That meant masters, daddies, mommies, mistresses, ma'ams, everybody. But we got specialized. With getting specialized, on the one hand, how freaking fantastic is it that you could go to a group who had your exact kink? Much easier to find people who want to do your kink with you. But on the other hand, what a terrible way to no longer be exposed to the vast options and personal differences. The lack of exposure also makes us sometimes judgmental and intolerant of anything or anyone who does not look like us. That is a mistake, and that mistake will limit the possibilities of your soul and keep you small. I wonder, what have we really learned from the past? I've been listening to people currently, and established groups talk about how the invasion of those 50 Shades of Grey folks, it surprised me how much I hear an us versus them mentality. For me, it's like hearing history repeat itself twice, at least. First, it was the story of O in the 70s, considered truly ridiculous. However, hot fantasy for some. Then it was the internet and all the folks who showed up ready to get their rocks off and find what they could. I hear people speak of the 50 Shades of Grey readers as if they are nebulous strangers to be treated with suspicion and great caution. What would make them any different from any of us? We all show up and hopefully have experiences that put stars in our eyes. We all show up and hopefully have experiences that we learn we're not alone, and then we learn there's options beyond what we imagined. Some of us learn that a deep soul need can be satisfied here. And guess what? We all want more. If we saw an influx of people who found their interest in BDSM, leather, DS, MS, pick your verbiage, because they read a fantasy book, perhaps our concern should not be how unfit for our company they are. Perhaps our concern should be, what can we do to educate them? And can we do better than the generations in the past? We are better prepared locally and globally to provide an education and introduction to all types of kink than any previous time in history. We are better prepared to pave a path to sustainable sexual freedom. In the last 30 years, we have created major resources. We have educators who have been teaching for 3 and 4 decades. There is a solid list of twisted people who have been here for 3 decades or better, and they are teaching. One of them is Apex founders, Master Bird and Slave Nadine, Liza's slave Jody, Race Banyan, Vi Johnson, Peter Fisk, Gil Kessner, and yes, I'm going to admit it in public, me. Our communities are possessed of role models for DS and MS relationships that extend much further than one legendary couple per community who managed to have a loving relationship for longer than 10 years. And oh yes, now we also have role models for people who are willing to admit openly that they're in love with each other. Hallelujah. Now, don't get me wrong. This is not to say you have to have age in order to possess a valuable voice. I am not ageist, and I am the last one to advocate age. I think all things can be fixed. I am saying that experience matters. I'm saying sometimes it's really helpful to be able to look at the past as a point of reference. Sometimes knowing history will allow you to forge your own and truly not repeat anything unnecessary, but be fully yourself. We have the Leather Archives and Museum, who archives and preserves our kink histories, not leather histories, kink histories. We have coalitions like the NCSF and consortiums like CARIS. There are independent research projects that are creating data and answering questions that will influence lawmaking, public opinion, and how the world at large will view BDSM in 20 years. I am delighted we live in a time where the Huffington Post will release an article discussing the possibility that relationships containing a kink component may exceed other types of relationships in their commitment to communication. It's the icing on the cake when they also note that kink relationships are healthy. Our communities are creating this massive data to be studied by future generations, and we're on the yellow brick road that leads, well, maybe not to Kansas this time, but I am betting it is going to be a hell of a journey. Through organizations who are providing educational opportunities and creating resources, our communities have exceeded the shades of one color. We have moved past finding compatriots only in the darkness of a back room of a bar or an underground dungeon. We no longer must wait years for an invitation to enter a privately owned dungeon because there is nothing else in the area. Our communities are going mainstream. The long-running show called Bones, one of their shows featured the death of a pro-dom client. His death was caused by a ball gag. Naturally, they interviewed the pro-dom who owned the dungeon where the victim died. She was in street clothing. Nice touch, not the za-za zoom of let us show you how hot we are type thing. More importantly, the interview revealed a very well-educated woman who was well-versed in safe, sane, and consensual. In the interview's questions that were asked, the conversation touched on safety concerns, safe words, long-term relationships, and advanced negotiation. ABC's hit show Castle references the kinks of their main characters on a regular basis in a fun-filled manner every single year. General Hospital recently, oh people, seriously, General Hospital recently had a very steamy scene between one of its super couples. The couple, Alexis Davis, an attorney, always an attorney, just saying, and a mob kingpin, Jerome Julian, they did some role play that involved the mob boss. Oh, yes, it was a moment. Julian Jerome was on his knees pleading to be of sexual service to make up for his transgressions. People, he was shirtless, and yes, it bears mention, it was remarkable. I have seen a lot of scenes in my life. I rewinded. I had to watch it twice. None. It was awesome. Good porn comes in all forms. Yes. So that was scalding, sexy hot, if you didn't already get that idea. But these athletic sexcapades are normalizing bondage, spanking, role play, and all types of kink. Our groups have a presence on the internet, and we advertise our events, our educational offerings, and we do interviews with the mainstream press. We have our own social and financial economies. We're out. We've stepped out of the shadows and proclaimed not merely that we're here, but we advertise with certainty what we offer. It's not just 50 shades of gray. It's full color with millions of pixels, hues, and shades. The need I saw in 1998 has not changed. We need to explore our freedom fully, but we also need to continue to educate ourselves and do it well in order to explore that freedom in ways that we create good, fun-loving hurt and not harm. We seem to think freedom is something we can just take, exert, and have. It doesn't work that way. I have a sense that we understand the concept of freedom, but I remain unconvinced that we use the tools of freedom to their fullest. I'm not sure that we take the concept of freedom personally. Your freedom is personal, and it's only yours if you claim it. In August, the National Coalition for Sexual Freedom released their consent violations survey. According to this study, 33% of people who had their consent violated thought that they were being manipulated and coerced. That is 1/3 of the people who experienced a consent violation. I want you to extrapolate and consider the possibility that the people who took this survey were networked and connected in our communities enough to even know the survey existed. Now please imagine the broader world and all those people out there tying each other up who aren't networked. Can you imagine how many people read a book, seriously loved it, and they're out there looking to play? And I ask you, what's really happening with some of them? Another group stated 26% of consent violations were considered a violation due to lack of skills, lack of knowledge, or a miscommunication. All of the above speaks to the absolute need for quality education. We need to have our personal foundations in order. You need to know your boundaries and communicate when you feel uncomfortable. We need to know the language that represents us and go the extra mile to ensure the person we're talking to has a similar understanding of our language. We need to exercise our freedom to say, no, you can't do that. No, I don't want you to do that, and I mean it. That is non-negotiable. The people who reported having their consent violated and felt coerced during a mid-scene renegotiation, 32% of them did not think they were of sound mind. Another 17.5% were unsure they were of sound mind. Folks, this is just a sliver below 50% of the people who felt their consent was violated and did renegotiations mid-scene. They didn't think they were of sound mind. This is a call to all of us. To those on the S side of the coin, be upfront and put renegotiations during a scene off limits if you believe you are not of sound mind to make a new decision during play. For those of you on the top side of things, take note. Half the people are unsure of their consent. Perhaps renegotiating when everyone is higher than a kite is not your best call. Negotiate this beforehand. Really have the conversation. In order to fully understand consent, you need to have more than a surface relationship with your own consent. Have you exercised your freedom to educate yourself and taken advantage of your resources? Are you well informed so you can ensure your safety and satisfaction? Do you know anatomy, chemical states of the body, emotional states? What qualifies as competent execution of physical skill sets? Do you require excellence of your own communication skills? Are you willing to reveal yourself so you can say what is hard to say when you feel completely uncomfortable, vulnerable, and uncertain? Are you a revolutionary force in your own life? Ascertain the freedom to choose by knowing yourself well and not tuning out when you hear for the 1000th time. To do this, you must know yourself well, just because you heard it so many times. Have you invested the time in yourself and with yourself that you would wish someone else to invest in you who looked you in the eye and said, "I love you"? I've referenced vast changes by the decade of our last 40 years. Trust me when I tell you I haven't done it justice with such a tiny mention. In light and reference of watching 4 decades of change, do I think our current decade is going to be defined by the invasion of the 50 Shades of Grey enthusiasts? Not a chance. So they read a fantasy book and they want to take it further in their lives. Okay. Sounds so familiar. Isn't that what we've all done when we discovered desire? When Apex formed in 1988 by Katrina, Nancy Ava Miller, and Master Burt Cutler, AKA Burt Steele, I had to. I have little doubt they imagined what Apex would become, and I have no doubt Apex exceeded their dreams. Most dreams become a reality to meet a need. I am betting your founders created what they needed, and for the last 27 years, Apex has continued to create the dreams and meet the needs of those who have come through your doors. I am sentimental when it comes to Apex. I've been blessed to teach workshops here and hold my retreats here. One of the workshops allowed me to cane slave Wen, who has been my friend for many years. The amusement of that event alone, I am forever in your debt. I've been blessed by the friendship and confidence of many, many of your members over the last 27 years. I've crawled on your floors. I've demonstrated the body language of service. I've thrown my property to the floor and rested my boot on their head. I was here when Master Burt was covered, and I've been here for a few collarings and a few breakups. I've held many of your members when they grieved and cried. I've happily bloodied a few people in your dungeons, and I'm just going to say that perhaps once or twice, in a different decade, there may have been a serious sexual adventure that is worthy of recall. I know I'm not alone in my sentiment or in my experiences. I am one of thousands who has been welcomed and found desire and so much more here. This isn't where I go all Pollyanna over Apex either. Apex has weathered a battle or three, perhaps even a full-out war, but you have answered the challenge. You've come through it and adhered to your mission. In your mission statement, you state that you will provide a respectful and dignified environment. That is the foundation for a flourishing culture, and not just one culture, but many cultures. Respect, as called for by Apex's bylaws, is key to all things. Tolerance and acceptance are not sufficient. Tolerance and acceptance are the concepts of a fledgling, marginalized population who are unsure how much space they are allowed to take up. Respect is a certain concept that is required of a confident population who will not accept anything less. Apex has learned the lessons of diversity and will welcome others who find their way here regardless of how they discovered their wants. Apex will also benefit greatly. Today's stranger may be tomorrow's leader. You won't worry that there's an invasion coming. You'll welcome and adjust to the organic evolution. I also have no doubt you will take advantage of the bigger dating pool. Apex has provided the gateway to freedom with your ongoing commitment to education. The expansive opportunities for education you have offered over the years is staggering. Apex has done more than answer the call to educate. You rewrote the book on it. There is not another group in the country that I know of who is offering 600 plus opportunities for education every year. You're even so civilized that one of them is called Cocktails and Conversation. And if you're playing Frank Sinatra at that, don't tell me. I might just pass out of jealousy. By co-sponsoring Consent Month with the NCSF, you are addressing the core issue for sadomasochistic communities, polyamorous communities, DS, MS, and the kink communities that you serve. Thank you for throwing your support into an issue that impacts every single one of us from all walks of kink life. This is an issue of necessity, personal freedom, and it requires due consideration. You're a shining example of a powerhouse who uses their resources well and empowers their membership. You're providing the necessary foundation of education to aid your membership in making responsible choices. You're helping your membership to stand in full power and be healthy, happy, and well entertained. Apex has been brave enough to reinvent, reimagine, and retool. You have tangible reasons to be proud of who you are and who you have been as an organization. You have chosen to create a future that wasn't imagined and exceeded the future that was imagined. As to that 50 Shades of Grey primer, I wouldn't give it another thought. Apex has brought the ultimate crayon box of 152 colors to your membership, and then something else happened. Apex blew that ultimate box to smithereens and created the kinky retina revolution with millions of pixels welcoming everyone to its doors. Happy birthday, Apex, and congratulations on your own revolution.